It's summer at the UTEP Prospector, but we're throwing off the beach attire and throwing on the suits and ties because for episode 2 of the Prospector Podcast Summer Edition, we are speaking with none other than the District Attorney, James Montoya. James Montoya joins the Prospector Podcast to discuss how he and his office are doing at the midway point of his current term. He talks to us about his policies, what he's tough on, his stance on mental health, and internship opportunities. So, if you're a student graduating from UTEP interested in law, or overall just interested in the safety of your city, this is an episode you definitely want to tune into. My name is Sebastian Perez-Navarro, and we are here at the county courthouse, not for anything bad, instead, to talk to our DA. You're watching the Prospector Podcast, episode 2 of our summer edition. For the summer edition of the Prospector Podcast, we made one promise to ourselves. Every single episode was going to be filmed outside of our regular studio. And for the second episode of the Prospector Podcast Summer Edition, we're in the office of the 34th District Attorney in Texas, specifically the one in El Paso. That's none other than the office of Mr. James Montoya. Mr. Montoya, thank you so much for joining the Prospector Podcast.
Of course, thanks for the invite.
And we appreciate being able to see this room of the library. Have you read every single book in here?
I haven't. A lot of them, all of these over here, now they're online. They're very antiquated. Now everything's on Westlaw. But, it shows you, it used to be, somebody had to order these every single year to stay on top of the case law updates.
One of, I could say, my favorite employees that you have is Andra Liddon. She was showing us around this entire library, the books that you hand to the interns. I think there's a little intimidating factor when entering rooms like this and seeing how much literature you have to read to prepare, right?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I always tell people in high school, when I'm doing career days, either middle school, high school, college, people go to law school or they think, oh, you argue a lot, you should go to law school. Tell them no. 80% of this job is reading and writing. Only a small fraction of it is really about arguing and litigating. It's reading more than anything.
I think that's something maybe law and journalism have in common, which leads me to introducing our co-host, my boss, editor-in-chief of the Prospector, Ximena. Ximena, we have made it to the courthouse.
I know. Back to the courthouse. I used to come a lot here because my sister does mock trial and she wants to go to law school. She's doing a law camp right now. Yeah. So this is so I guess I like seeing what her future is going to look like. I'll leave that to her though. Yeah. I'll stick to my journalism. Yeah.
I think that transitions us into your origin, Mr. Montoya. Mm-hmm. As Andra was explaining to us, you're a big aficionado of mock trial.
Yeah, huge.
From our understanding, born and raised in El Paso, went to America's High School, which I'm sorry, but I have to say this, go Troop, go Eastwood. After that, you attended George Washington University Law School, one of the premier law schools in the United States. Can you just walk us through why choose law for your career?
Yeah, well, it wasn't always in the cards for me. I'm an aficionado. I'm a big supporter of mock trial because it changed my life. That is not an understatement. That if I had not done mock trial at America's High School 20 years ago, I would not be your DA today. I don't know any lawyers growing up or didn't know any growing up. There are no lawyers in my family. And I had thought very seriously about maybe going to one of the service academies. I knew I wanted to do public service of some kind. I have family members that are in law enforcement. And, I remember one of the classes that you had to take in high school was speech, right? And so my speech coach or speech teacher, they decided, I'm not really sure where it got, they decided that they were going to start the mock trial team at America's. Hadn't existed before. And so my teacher reached out to my mom and said, you need to make him come to mock trial practice. And I did. And I was very fortunate that the attorney coach that was helping coach the team was my former boss, former district attorney Jaime Esparza. And I just really loved the activity. I was good at it. It was fun. It was intellectually stimulating. And like I said, it is not an understatement to say that it changed my life. And it made me realize that law was possible, and it was something that I enjoyed. I enjoyed litigating a fake case, right? Both sides. And so that George Washington was actually not my first choice, but they had a really neat combined BA JD program, which when you think about it is kind of crazy because the law school tentatively accepts you based off of your high school credentials, off of your high school GPA, your SAT, your ACT scores. And so my only end of the bargain was to keep the 3.7 through undergrad. And if I kept that, then the law school had to admit me. And so that was a really good deal. Really enjoyed my time in DC, but I always knew, actually, every summer I would come back, almost every summer I would come back and intern here at the DA's office. And over that time period, it really solidified for me that I not only wanted to come back to El Paso, I wanted to be a prosecutor here and serve the community here.
Yeah. You mentioned kind of El Paso. A lot of our students are first gen.
Mm-hmm.
How do they, I mean, even in this room, we talked about the books. How do they get over that maybe intimidation about going to a law school or like even just like thinking about it?
Yeah, it's, I think you just got to get out, put yourself out there. I know that sounds a lot easier said than done. I'm really big on the internship program here. Recently it's been emphasizing a lot of our law students because we're in need of hiring lawyers sooner. But, at some point, we still have undergraduate interns. That's what gave me my start here in this office. And so until you're exposed to it, until I guess you don't really know, right? Unless you have a family member that's a lawyer or somebody that's a lawyer. I think if you're in college and you're thinking about it or you think it might be up your alley, reach out to a lawyer. And if you don't know, you can cold call. You can send an email to our office, to the county attorney's office, to any number of government offices, and they will answer your questions. I mean, people here, especially in El Paso, lawyers here in El Paso are super friendly. They want to see other El Pasoans succeed. They will help answer any questions you might have. I'm confident if you reached out, if you cold called an El Paso lawyer, any lawyer in any field, they would take your call and they would answer the questions.
2 years ago, you were the district attorney of the 34th Judicial District of Texas, the 11th ever DA in our judicial district. Right. But I want to take you 10 years back from that election in 2014. You decide to come back to El Paso after completing law school, and you become the assistant district attorney under then DA Jaime Esparza. Can you walk me through why you decided coming back to El Paso and wanting to address criminal activity here in this city specifically?
Yeah, well, I will tell you, when I graduated from Americas, I couldn't wait to leave El Paso. I wanted to get as far away and as fast as possible. And that was another reason why I wanted to leave the state to go to school. Some of my good friends at school went to A&M, went to UT, went to UTEP. And, certainly part of me wanted to have a college experience with them, but I was really yearning to leave and just try something totally different. And that was cool. And then you start missing home, and you start missing your friends, and you start missing your family, and you grow up here in a way thinking that everywhere is going to be like here. And it's not until you leave that you realize El Paso really is a special and unique place. People here take the weather for granted, and you go somewhere, you go spend a DC in the summer in DC and super humid, super hot, you take a shower, you walk out the door and you already feel drenched in sweat. So, it was freshman year, sophomore year of college that I started more realistically thinking I do want to go home. I feel like I can make a bigger difference there. I mean, so in DC, this is a perfect example. DC, 6-7 law schools in the Washington, DC metropolitan area. and they are each graduating. You know, I had 500 classmates in my graduating class. Georgetown was the same size. American and Catholic and University of DC, you know, they all had law schools, and they're all graduating hundreds of lawyers. And, you know, you start realizing they were graduating so many lawyers, and this was right after the big recession, that some people were graduating. There weren't enough law jobs. The legal market was oversaturated. I knew people that were graduating from law school that were, you know, bussing tables, and they were baristas, and they, were barbacks, and that's how they were having to repay their loans. And it over the time that I was spending and interning here at the DA's office over the summers, it became evident to me that you could make a lot bigger of a difference here in El Paso. Like, one person who's very motivated you can really come in and start changing things and start, like I said, making a difference. And that was not how I felt in DC. I don't know if you want to call it, big fish, small pond kind of thing or whatever, but, in smaller communities, especially one like here where we don't have a law school yet, where there is a need, there's a lot of room and a lot of room for opportunity and a lot of room to make a difference.
You mentioned it, and I'd love to bounce back at it. The possibility of a law school at the University of Texas at El Paso. 2024 was not only the year you won the DA position, it was also the year where UTEP released a feasibility study of a law school possibly being implemented. Now we sit in 2026. There was already a purposeful proposal made at the Texas legislature just last year. And overall, UTEP has stated that they need $20 million to fund the program, $60 to $110 million to fund the building, but they plan to make a proposal at next year's Texas legislature.
Right.
Can you stress for me the need of a law school at UTEP, and what can we expect for when that becomes reality? As the university has stated, this can come as early as 2030.
Yeah, so I was really excited by the feasibility study, because I will tell you, I was not always a proponent of a law school here in El Paso. As I mentioned, and that's largely based on my own personal experiences. As I mentioned, there was an oversaturation of lawyers in DC. That's never been the issue here in El Paso. Anybody, if a lawyer comes back to El Paso and they're hardworking and they're dedicated, they can set up their own law firm, and it's tough to get a business going, but after a while, there is enough business opportunities here in El Paso for somebody to make it. The other issue is, in the mid-2000s, we had this really disturbing trend of for-profit law schools. These were law schools that were opening up across the United States, that were admitting students that couldn't or generally weren't able to get into other law schools, and incurring a lot of student debt in the process. And unfortunately, some of these schools, the vast majority of the students that were being admitted at these schools, when they graduated, they couldn't pass the bar. And so you had people that were graduating from law school, hundreds of thousands of dollars in debt. They couldn't pass the bar to start their profession as a lawyer, and had no way of paying all this off. And so I really did not want that for El Pasoans. For me, leaving was a really formative event that I'm very grateful for. I mean, it's a big part of who I am. And to an extent, I feel like people should do that. But at the same time, I know that there are reasons why people can't leave for graduate school, right? And for familial commitments or any, number of reasons that they need that opportunity here. And if it was here, they would take advantage of that. And so, I was really happy that the feasibility study was commissioned. It ended up showing that the El Paso legal market, the regional legal market, could accommodate 100 new lawyers per year. That sounds about right. And so it's obviously not just El Paso. Far West Texas, there are lawyer vacancies in a number of government offices between here and San Antonio. Some of the counties that I cover, they call it the 34th Judicial District, because it's not just El Paso County. It's Hudspeth and Culberson County. both of those counties, that's Sierra Blanca and Van Horn, for several years, they did not have county attorneys in either of those counties because there weren't enough lawyers. I know my counterpart in Doriana in Las Cruces, they have a hard time recruiting lawyers. There's only one law school in the entire state of New Mexico at UNM. I think there's a tremendous need for lawyers in, southern New Mexico as well. But you were exactly right. They estimate $20 million for the first 10 years of operating costs, and that doesn't include the construction. But I know UTEP has really been proactive in getting the legal community involved. I mean, we saw a $5 million contribution from Tani Chaparro and Acosta, right? Like that's huge, with the match from the Paul Foster Family Foundation. And so I know the plan is to go to the legislature next year, starting, in 2020, 2027. I think we are on track for an opening in 2030, very realistically so. And then first graduating class in 2033.
Yeah, you mentioned this like leaving, and I think we've talked about it in our office and everything. The stigma of like, if you don't leave El Paso, it's almost like you're not set up for success. With this new law school and you, someone who left and then came back, how do you think that law school would help? Do we think it'd bring in more people from the outside to teach these students, more people who just kind of want to stay here?
I think it's going to be a mix of both. I know one of the big parts of the law school is promoting, one of the, I think all law schools try to identify, a niche. At George Washington, they have a really excellent patent law, intellectual property program. And, a lot of my classmates at law school were engineers by trade. That's what they had done. Many of them, law was their second career. They're going to get into IP law. Different law schools try to find their different niche. As I understand, one of the targets for the law school that here is going to be international commerce, right? Cross-border, transactions that, lawyers that are familiar both with laws in the United States and as well as laws in Mexico, and facilitating that trade. And I know, some of the law firms here in El Paso, they do focus on those types of transactions, mergers and acquisitions for international companies. So I do think that there is a role for us to fill here. I mean, like I said, when you mention our closest law schools in Texas are St. Mary's and Texas Tech, right? San Antonio and Lubbock, UNM, and then U of A in Tucson, right? And so there is still a regional need for lawyers here. And I think it's going to be an opportunity for folks here that want to go to law school, but I also think there's a draw to folks that are interested in international trade.
To continue on with the subject, when UTEP does open a law school, manifesting it.
Yeah, absolutely.
When UTEP's law school does open, it would be the second in the University of Texas system. Now, on the topic of sort of that imposter syndrome of staying home or that negative stigma, is it something good or bad for the image of the University of Texas at El Paso to go all in on that law niche? Or should this law school be something that is advertised towards all students nationwide? Or should it be specifically targeted to the students in El Paso?
I think most smaller law schools, if you're not in the top 14, right, those are really the schools that have nationwide appeal. If you go to Harvard, you can practice law in Florida or in California or where, Stanford, same thing. Texas Tech, last time that I checked, they're not ranked in the top 100 law schools. But here in Texas, a lot of lawyers go to Tech. Here in El Paso, a lot of lawyers go to Tech. And so I think every law school needs to find its niche. I think here, if our focus is on the region, I think that's where we're going to see most of our applicants. Another part that I forgot to mention is Spanish-speaking lawyers. I mean, there is a tremendous need for bilingual lawyers, certainly in El Paso, but everywhere else in the state of Texas. If you are a bilingual lawyer and you leave, train, get your education here in El Paso and go and you set up a law firm in Houston, I guarantee you're going to have business out the door. right? Or if you go and do that in Lubbock, or if you go do that in Dallas Fort Worth, if you are a bilingual lawyer, there are opportunities knocking on your door constantly. And so, we kind of take that for granted here in El Paso, that so many of our lawyers are bilingual. If we could export that, train lawyers here, and certainly we want to keep lawyers here as well, but that is a very marketable skill that I think the university needs to hone in on, because if we are graduating, bilingual lawyers, that's something that firms and offices across the country are really, there's a need for that.
Midway through your term that you were elected in for 2024, we go back to 2 years ago. One of the biggest stances that you and your office made was prosecuting crimes that endanger communal safety. Yeah. But simultaneously, it's also taking a stance and supporting those who may have mental health consequences by their side. Yeah. Now that we stand midway through your term, can you tell us where these stances are, how they've been implemented to our community, and what the plan is moving forward as we move along your term?
Yeah, so our lawyers, so much of this job requires discretion and judgment. Every case is different. The facts of each case are unique. What a defendant's what an accused, background is varies tremendously. And so, part of what I have asked my lawyers to do is I've entrusted them. There are very few hard deadlines, or you will handle this type of case in this specific way. I don't believe in that, because there's always an exception to that, and then an exception to an exception. And so, the lawyers are entrusted with a broad range of discretion on what they feel they need to spend their time on. I tell them globally, for misdemeanor crimes, we're talking about DWIs and family violence. Those are the two cases that, the law doesn't treat as seriously the first time. They're still misdemeanors, but those could be homicides in the very near future, right? Again, family violence, we've studies have shown this cycle of violence that can be escalating, that might need state intervention as early as possible to stop and literally separate this relationship, because it's dangerous. And so those are the marching orders that I give the lawyers, right? Those are the types of cases we want to be focusing on. If you want to give somebody pretrial diversion, basically they take some classes, they get the case dismissed, you use your judgment to do that. One of the things our office, before I took office, has underwent through a lot of turmoil. My elected predecessor was in office for 2 years. She resigned halfway through her term. And then we had an appointed DA from the governor, who was the DA for 2 years, finished out the term. In that time, it's difficult to understate how much the processes and just the standard operating procedures of our office went out the door. The number of cases that were being filed, they were just piling up. Law enforcement was bringing our office hundreds, thousands of cases that were just piling up, and no action was being taken on them at all. And these were people that some of them had been arrested, and they were out on bond for months, years, before even knowing what was going to happen to their case. And here it got as worse as, the pile of cases was over 10,000 cases where the DA's office hadn't made a decision whether to move forward or not. And so our office has been working through that. We did finally get through that at a point last year, so that big stack of 10,000 has gone away. We are now reviewing cases as they come in. They're reviewed. They move on to the court. So when law enforcement sends us a case, we have three options. We can accept it for prosecution, meaning we're going to move forward with the case. We're going to file the case in court and go through that process. We can decline the case, meaning we tell the law enforcement agency, this doesn't meet the elements of the offense, or, the evidence isn't enough. We're not going to move forward. And that's when we decline a case for prosecution. And then the third one is we can return it back to them and saying, you need to do some more investigating. There's still some witnesses that need to be talked to. There's still some evidence that needs to be collected. Do that and then bring it back to us. And so every year, El Paso County law enforcement agencies bring us 30,000 cases. So that's the El Paso Police Department, the Sheriff's Office, DPS, the constables, the school district police departments, all the agencies combined, they bring us 30,000 cases. I have 80 lawyers, okay, to look at 30,000 cases. And so those, we end up declining about 12,000. We ended up charging approximately 18,000 cases a year, 9,000 misdemeanors and 9,000 felonies. And then those go into county courts and district courts. And that's just the start. Then the cases actually have to get resolved, either through a diversion program or a dismissal or a plea or sometimes a trial.
So is it safe to say that there's a room that looks exactly like this, just filled to the brim with cases?
You know, they're all online now. So we've gone paperless. And so that all happens electronically now. The only ones that was something that we went through probably 10 years ago, because it used to be law enforcement agencies would bring a manila folder with their reports on it, and a lawyer would have to sit and read them, and we would save all of our notes on the manila folder. You'd write them on the inside, and we used to have giant file rooms just like this, and your secretary, the day before the court hearing, they'd have to go and pull all the files for the hearings that day. And then you'd take it up to court. When you came back, you gave it back to your secretary, and they sorted it all back out. And none of that happens anymore. Now it's all paperless.
Yeah, saving the trees with this one.
For sure. But at the same time, that's honestly part of how some of these cases that fell through the cracks, unfortunately, because it's one thing to see cases pile up in a physical sense and say, oh, hey, we need to do something about this. Under my predecessor, we had these thousands of cases that were piling up electronically that no one saw. And if no one knew what they were looking for, they just, nobody worked on them. Yeah. And that's the thing, back to that first point, somebody's got to read it. You got to read the case. You got to watch the body cam videos. The lawyers have to assess, hey, is this a case worth prosecuting? And if so, how aggressively are we going to do it? That there's so much responsibility on prosecutors, because again, we decide, what are we going to charge? What are we going to move forward with? How aggressively are we going to do it? How strict are we going to be about it? But we have to take our cues from the community.
Yeah. And I mean, you mentioned you guys do thousands of cases each year. You guys have to go back and look at what fell through the cracks.
Right.
So far, what has been your guys' biggest accomplishment? What are you proudest of?
Yeah. So I know this might seem kind of in the weeds, but one of the things that I am most proud of is we have reduced the number of active cases by over 2,000. Mm-hmm. So when I took office, the number of active cases in the court system were approximately 12,000. We've got that down to less than 10,000, right? And so again, I know that doesn't seem like a lot or very esoteric, but again, we have 80 lawyers to work on these 10, and that number changes. That's the number on any given day. I mean, that's the thing, is cases are constantly coming in. Every day we're resolving more cases. The goal is always to be resolving more cases than are coming in, because that's how we're going to get the caseload down. And I think, at the end of this year, if we keep the pace that we've been doing, I know it seems kind of crazy, but we're finally getting back to a pre-COVID pace of litigation. The number of jury trials that we're having has finally gotten back to a level, one of the biggest points of recruiting for young lawyers to come to the DA's office is you get a lot of trial experience. If you start here, you're going to get a lot of experience right away. When I was a brand new prosecutor, my first 6 months, I had 10 jury trials. And, unfortunately, some of the folks that graduated from law school during COVID, People that graduated in 21, 22, they've been lawyers now for 2, 3, 4 years, and some of them have had one trial, two trials. Some of them had no trials, right? And the reason why that's so important is because, as a lawyer, you have to know which are the cases that are worth fighting over.
And sometimes you got to go to trial and
get your teeth kicked in and realize, hey, this is probably a case that should have been resolved some other way. And that's both as a prosecutor and as a defense lawyer. Part of being a defense lawyer is you got to know when to tell your client, hey, the evidence is really strong. You really ought to consider pleading guilty. Versus, as a prosecutor, this case is really weak. The evidence isn't there. There's a lot of inconsistencies. We should dismiss this case. That's where you got to learn that judgment and that discretion.
One area targeted in your campaign was the idea of recidivism and trying to avoid that idea. Now, I think it's a safe area to say that there is conflict in blaming crimes on mental health. In that case, how does your office walk that tightrope?
Yeah, I mean, part of the directive to the lawyers is to focus on repeat offenders. If somebody and escalating consequences, right? If somebody, generally, for most first-time offenders that have no criminal history, and it's a nonviolent offense, we're offering you pretrial diversion. Like I said, that's where you take a class, you pay a fee, and your case gets dismissed, right? Your next time that doesn't, if something happens more serious, now you're on probation with a conviction, right? The next time something happens, we're escalating it up, and ultimately, if it shows like you're not rehabilitating, if we can't get it to you, then we're looking at prison time, right? That's not to say that's always the case, right? If you're a first-time offender and you commit murder, we're probably going to need to send you to prison, right? Even if it's your very first time and you've never been in trouble before, if you've committed something super violent, super dangerous, you're going to be held accountable. And I will tell you, I've talked to thousands of El Pasoans during the campaign, knocked on their doors or heard from them. This is a community that, believes in accountability, but is also very forgiving, right? And they want people to have second chances. And if people are making good faith efforts to turn their life around, my sense talking to El Pasoans and even from juries, they believe in second chances for folks if they feel that there's an effort there, right? On the other hand, there are some people that are so dangerous that need to be incapacitated, right? They cannot live in polite society. Them being here is a danger to other people, and so they literally have to be separated and sent somewhere else. And so that's part of the judgment call that I entrust my lawyers to make is, hey, is this something that we really need to go to the mat on, and that we need a trial? Is this someone that has been given an opportunity to rehabilitate and hasn't taken that chance, and so we need to ratchet up the consequences.
That emphasis on mental health has been taken to your office. You've made history not only because you're the 11th DA of this judicial district, but because you introduced the first ever therapy dog from this office.
Well, actually, the therapy dog started before I got here. We've been promoting him. He's been a great asset. He was actually started by one of my predecessors, but we've kept him going. I think he's really helpful. People love him, and he's been a really big asset. We actually got him. He himself was a victim of an animal cruelty case, and so he was put in touch with our office, and they got him going, and we're keeping it going. So everybody loves him. He walks around the hallways. I think he's here Monday, Wednesday, Fridays, and he helps out on cases where, when we're meeting with the victim, they want somebody or something there that's friendly, that helps them relax. He's really helpful on child sex cases, on cases where those victims are, just really nervous, really reluctant to talk about what happened to them. Because, what's lost on a lot of folks is, they think, oh, well, the victim tells the police and then that's the end of it. that's the beginning, right? These victims, they need to come talk to us about their case and what happened to them. If the case ends up gonna have to go to a trial, then they have to come back and tell a jury full of strangers what happened to them. They have to be asked questions by the lawyer defending the person that did it to them in the same room, 10 feet away from them. And so, it's lost on a lot of folks, the entire trial process, how traumatizing it is, and what an ordeal it is. And so part of having Buddy here is to hopefully lessen that burden.
One of the most common things that you typically hear from students who have the ability and the gift to pursue law typically pull back because of the concern of ethics, specifically representing people who they may not want to represent for the actions that they committed. How do you handle those ethical boundaries when you represent a case?
Well, so that's the best part about being a prosecutor, because I have the best client anybody could ask for, which is the state of Texas. And what is the state of Texas? Who is the state of Texas? It's all of us. It's all of us collectively. We are the sovereignty that is the state of Texas. So that's my client, is the community. My only obligation as a prosecutor is to do the right thing. By law, my job is to not seek convictions, but to see that justice is done. That's it, period. And so, if I think someone is not guilty, my ethical obligation is to not follow that case, is to dismiss it and not pursue it, right? Which is unique. That prosecutor's duty is unique compared to all other lawyers, even those in private practice. That you have criminal defense lawyers who defend people that are accused of a variety of different crimes, some very heinous, but the Constitution says they have a right to a defense, and I'm very grateful that we have lawyers that are willing to do that work. I did that for 2 years as a public defender. But even if you're in corporate law and you have a corporate client or a business or another private entity, you have an ethical obligation to zealously advocate for that client to do what they want. I mean, you provide them advice, you give them the best advice you can. They tell you the course of action that they want to take. Your job as the lawyer is to execute that, so long as it doesn't break the law and doesn't violate lawyer ethics. And lawyers do have an ethical code about what is you are and aren't allowed to do. All of that applies to them. For us, our client, like I said, is the community, and so we just have to do the right thing. And so for me, it's very easy. I go to sleep every night very easily, knowing that we are only here to do the right thing, and because that's who the client is, right? And that's where also sometimes people have the misperception where we are not the lawyers for the victims. I am not the victim's lawyer. I'm the lawyer for the state, for the community. Now, generally, the victim's interest and the state's interest line up, right? If the victim wants the offender held accountable and the state wants the offender held accountable, we're all on the same page. But sometimes our interests are different, right? Sometimes we have cases where the victim really wants us to go forward. They feel like they've been wronged in some way. But when you review the facts, what happened wasn't actually a crime, right? And so you tell them, I'm sorry, this isn't a criminal offense against the penal code. If you want, you can hire your own lawyer and you can file a lawsuit and you can try to recover, damages that way. Sometimes that happens. Those are tough conversations. Sometimes you have where the victim wants to move forward and we say the state does not. Sometimes it's the opposite, particularly on domestic violence cases, where the victim says, I don't want to move forward. I want to move on with my life. I want to drop the charges and just let it bygones be bygones. We as the state have to say, no, this was a pretty serious offense. You're in danger. Somebody is going to get seriously hurt, if this behavior continues. And so there's a community interest, the state interest in pursuing this case, even when the victim doesn't, right? And so, again, another classic example, well, this is the opposite example, right? Where the victim doesn't want to move forward and the state does. So that's kind of the challenging. Those are the two scenarios that are challenging for prosecutors. But at the end of the day, our client, like I said, is the community, is the public, and so we just have to. What would the community want us to do in this case?
Yeah, you focus on the community.
Yeah.
So and you said you came back to El Paso to make that change in the community.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think right now is what you would like to see change in El Paso, and how does your role kind of help you advance that?
Yeah, well, I will tell you. So I ran for this position because I love this work, right? And you know, a couple of years ago, somebody asked me to run for city council, and I thought, you know, parks are important, roads are important, property taxes super important, you know, all of these things that are really important. But to me, the reason why I get up every day is our criminal justice system. And you know, what motivates me right now is rebuilding and repairing our criminal justice system over the damage that was done between 2021 and 2024. I mean, if you're not involved in the criminal justice system here, it's difficult to understate the institutional damage that was done by my predecessor, but you know, also by COVID. You know, we've seen just the processes that broke down where things were not flowing smoothly, and so that's really the change that I want to see, the change that I want to bring. You know, if we can, we've stabilized our community, our criminal justice system. You know, I think we've stabilized hiring. I mean, one of the big problems that we were having here before I took office was constant turnover. I mean, people were starting in the office, and within 6 months, a year, they were leaving, and then someone else would have to fill in for them. And so, going back to reading the cases, right? If you're a lawyer and here are your 10 cases, you got to read them, and now you quit. Well, now those cases have to go to somebody else, and then their pile gets bigger, and they have more cases to read. And then what do they want to do? They want to quit, right? And so it just has this cascading effect where no one's working on the cases, they're falling through the cracks, and nobody is getting justice. Victims aren't getting justice. People that are accused aren't getting justice. And so we are still getting ourselves out of that hole. We've made a lot of progress. I feel like I said, we've stabilized things. We're building upon that. We need to grow new lawyers. I mean, one of the things that's still happening even to this day is all of the, you know, law offices here in El Paso, we're basically competing over the same lawyers. You know, I hired 2 lawyers in the last 2 weeks. Got one of them from the public defender's office and one from the county attorney's office. That same week, I lost a lawyer to the county attorney's office. And so we're all competing for the same group of talented public servants. And now I think we're at the point where we just have to be growing our own new lawyers. And so to rebuild that kind of institutional competence. I mean, and we're even seeing this play out, you know, on the national scale. It's a lot easier to destroy institutions than it is to build them up and rebuild them. And that's the change that I want to see here, and that's the change that we're trying to bring to our criminal justice system.
Now that we're reaching the midway point through your term, what are the advancements in recruitment to get these lawyers to work for the district attorney's office? And what developments can we expect, not only for maybe outgoing college students looking for a career in law, but hopeful El Pasoans?
Yeah, so we've really gone all in on our internship program. Last year, you know, we had over a dozen interns. I think 10 of them were all law students. The vast majority of them were first-year law students. 4 of them came back as for their second summer this year, and so my hope sounds like they're invested. They're going to come back next year after they graduate. So right now, all of our entry-level positions are filled. So that I'm very grateful for. We're going to need some more positions from the Commissioner's Court to fill. But you know, one of the things that I was really proactive in our internship is choosing El Pasoans for them, because until we have a law school here, everyone that's a lawyer here in El Paso is from here. Two options. They're from here, they left for law school, and they chose to come back for family or for whatever reason. They chose to start their career here. Or they're not from here. Something drew them here, and they decided to stay. And there's a couple of lawyers in El Paso County that fits the model. And so, to me, I think it's a lot easier to persuade an El Pasoan that's in law school to come back home than it is to convince somebody that, is from Central Texas to, hey, take a chance and move on out here. Not saying that it can't be done, but I do think, having talked to our interns last year and this year, there is a spirit of civic engagement and desire to better this community. I mean, having talked to young folks, young El Pasoans, I don't get the sense that they just want to leave El Paso and say, good luck, bye. I do have the sense that they want to come back, they want to see things better. This is a place that they want to stay if the opportunities are there. And so, for us as those of us that are involved in law enforcement and the criminal justice system, I think it's up to us to make a baseline. We want this to be a safe community where people feel like they can raise a family, that they want to live a life, that there is, they don't have to worry about getting carjacked, at a random corner. We don't want that to be the case here. We want this to be a place where businesses feel like they can invest and start up, and that they, the rule of law exists, and that they're going to be treated fairly. And if they have issues, that law enforcement and the justice system is there to address them. We have seen, communities where that isn't the case, where the rule of law has broken down, where there is, vigilante and retaliatory violence because people don't feel like they can count on their local law enforcement to secure justice for them. And so we want to keep it that way here in El Paso. The El Paso Police Department solves a tremendous number of cases. There are some years where they have solved 100% of the murders that happen. Not every year, but even on the years when it's not 100%, it's like 90. Mm-hmm. Do you know what it is nationwide?
No.
50%. 50% of the murders in the United States don't get solved. And so here in El Paso, the fact that we're at 90, 80, 90, some years at 100%, I mean, it says a lot because people are willing to trust their law enforcement and their criminal justice stuff to come and report crimes, to be witnesses, and to do their part.
Mr. Montoya, before we end off this episode, I want to ask you this. Being someone who was born and raised in El Paso, who left to a university and came back and ended up in your position, can you give us an instant, a moment, or a story that reminded you throughout this current term why it is you love to represent this area of the country?
Yeah, I will tell you the resolution of the Walmart case at the beginning of my term was really very, very, very powerful. I mean, I believe in capital punishment. I was working on the case when it first happened in 2019. And frankly, I think he is someone that deserves the death penalty for what happened. And I feel that way. I campaigned on that way, saying that we would resume seeking the death penalty or continue seeking the death penalty. And, when I took office, one of the very first things we did was start scheduling individual meetings with the families of the next of kin of the victims, as well as the survivors, to see what they wanted to see happen with the case. I mean, when we took office in 2025, it had already been pending 5.5 years. And there was the resolution was still not clear when we could have a trial. There was a really good probability that if we wanted to move forward with the trial would have to get moved to another city, right? I mean, to find a jury, you have to have jurors that say that they haven't prejudged the case, that they don't have an opinion as to what the outcome should be. I think most El Pasoans had a feeling on what they felt should be the punishment. We would probably have to move the case. Who knows exactly when we're going to have the trial? It could have been 2026, 2027, possibly even 2028. And so after we met with the families and talked to them about what they wanted, and certainly there were some families that said we want the death penalty no matter how long it takes. But the vast majority of them said we just want this to be over with. We're tired of getting the calls. We're tired of having to come to court. I was the fourth DA in 5 years that they were dealing with, right? And so they said if you can get the case resolved, plead guilty and done with, that would be that's what they wanted. And so again, this wasn't a case. It's still the state's call, right? We listen to what the victims want. We listen to their input, but I don't represent the victims individually. I represent the community's interests. But after speaking to them, and I tell people if all of El Paso had been in the room when we were having these conversations, I am sure that you could not tell these families, I hear what you're saying. I know you want this case over with, but we're going to do the death penalty anyways. We're going to keep doing it, and you're just going to have to keep coming to court. I'm sorry. I don't think El Pasoans would have wanted to do that. And seeing the impact statements play out and some of the victims, the expressions that they let the community know, and some of the things that happened during it, was really, really moving. And so it's hard to believe that was already more than a year ago. Something to me that was a real priority to make sure that we like I said, it had already been pending for almost 6 years. We really wanted to get that resolved or know which way we were going to go as quickly as we could. And like I said, I'm glad that we were able to get it across the finish line.
Mr. James Montoya, thank you so much for your time, and thank you for joining the Prospector Podcast.
Thank you again for the opportunity.
A true honor to have you, and good luck for the rest of your term.
Thank you.
And thank you for joining us on episode 2 of the Prospector Podcast Summer Edition. A huge thank you to our camera people, Nate Flores and Kristian Hernandez, our co-host / EIC, Ximena Cordero. I'm Sebastian Perez-Navarro, and from the District Attorney's Office, being here for good behavior, by the way, nothing bad, we say so long. Thanks for watching The Prospector. We're over and out.